Hey, just a quick note regarding the current pandemic we're experiencing. So Ryan and I are okay. We are managing. These are challenging times, but we're just doing our best to bring you more fun and interesting content that will hopefully entertain you and help distract you from all the craziness that's going on. Maybe at some point in the future, we may do an episode addressing this whole issue more directly. But for now, we hope you enjoy this episode.
The Oni is summoned right next to Momotaro and his family, and he looks like basically naked Shrek if he's really, really buff. And he just spawns there, just hangs out with the family.
Uh-huh.
So we can clearly see the Oni had no bad intent.
No.
He just wants to hang out and lift weights.
Yeah, he's just hanging out with the family there. Like, I don't get it, right? Like, why they gotta go beat him up? Welcome to the show. I'm Tony and
I'm Ryan.
all right, so this is Ichimon Japan, and as always, Ichimon means one question, so we take just some random question related to Japan and try to come up with an answer, sometimes better, sometimes not so good, but we do our best. So, today's question is, was Momotaro a thief?
Not a thief.
So yes, thank you for referring to my typo in the recording software. Yes.
Well, I thought maybe Momotaro was a tiefling, and that's what we were going to talk about.
Well, I think we can say he was not a thief, although you brought up something interesting in that a thief is like a half demon, half human kind of thing. So
Well, tiefling, yeah.
a tiefling, yeah.
I'm just assuming thief is just shorthand for that.
Okay. So
You're using
we
a
can
slur.
Oh God, no. Anyway, no, thief was Momotaro, the legendary, super famous, perhaps the most famous folktale / fairy tale character from Japan. Was he a thief? So, in order to answer this, I think we should go really quickly retell the story of Momotaro. Now, as we're going to get into, there's just tons, hundreds, maybe even thousands, I don't know, but tons and tons and tons of different versions of the Momotaro story. It's a very old story, but there's a pretty generally acknowledged standard version, right?
Yeah. Or at least like
so-
elements that are shared across all versions.
Right. So we're just going to try to get through a very standard vanilla version of Momotaro, also known as Peach Boy in English, although I would say maybe that's not the best translation, but anyway.
It's better than some of the other ones. He was also called like Peachling or something in some of the...
Oh, I've never seen Peachling. I mean,
I
will...
tried to like go with it in some of them.
I've seen Son of Momotaro. No, Son of a Peach, something like that.
It's even weirder. Just keep
that's a little bit weird. Yeah. But Peach Boy, I mean, it's acceptable. It's kind of tough to translate Momotaro unless you go with like Momo Bob or something like that. Like, because Taro's like a...
The Adventures of Momo Bob.
No, well, I guess it would be Peach Bob. Huh? Yeah. So, because Taro's like a very generic like name / name suffix for boys. So I was just trying to come up with some kind of generic, common, popular boy's name in English.
No,
anyway,
I like Peach Bob now. That's what
Peach
I've called
Bob.
him for the rest of this story.
Okay, so Peach Bob. So a long time ago, mukashi, there was an old man and an old woman. An old woman goes to the river to do her laundry because gender stereotypes, and then the old man goes to cut some grass or wood or whatever. He goes to do his manly things.
You're just assuming stereotypes. Maybe they alternated every week, and it just happened to be her turn that time.
Well, I'm sure there's a very progressive variant somewhere. So, the old woman goes to do laundry, and as she's washing her clothes in the river, she sees a giant peach floating down the river, and somehow she gets it over to her. There's different ways that they get this done in the different stories, but she gets the giant peach. She thinks, oh, I'm going to take it back to Ji-chan, the old man, grandpa is whatever you want to call him, and because we're going to get to eat this giant, delicious-looking peach. They take it home. Then as they're going to cut into it, the peach splits open, and there's a baby inside, and the baby is crying, and then they're like, oh, we've always wanted a child, but we can never have one. This must be one sent to us by the gods. So then they raise the child. It becomes this like strong young man, usually at around 15 years old. Momotaro will go to Jichan, the old man, and say, somehow he heard about these oni, these demons, ogres. There's different ways you can translate that, but oni, they're in this island called Onigashima, and I'm gonna go like eliminate them. I'm gonna go like beat them up and take care of them. And so he goes off on a journey, and he runs into a dog, a monkey, and a pheasant one by one, and he has these
some versions of tiger.
Some versions of tiger. We'll come back to that. Oh goodness, will we come back to that? So the old lady had given Momotaro these. It's called kibidango. They are millet dumplings. We're not going to get into that, but they're like almost like they're like a snack, let's say, something that he can take with him to eat. And so he ends up giving one of these kibidango millet dumplings to each of the animals, and the animals join him on this quest to go take care of the oni in their castle on Onigashima. He ends up getting there. He usually ends up beating them up. They surrender. They say, here's our treasure. Please forgive us. Don't kill us. Momotaro and the animals take the treasure back to the village, and happily ever after, the old man, the old woman, Momotaro, everybody has like gold and all that stuff, and they're all
Except
happy. No more oni. Except for the oni, right? Yeah. So
they are quite
that's
unhappy. But very ripped.
Yeah. Oh, very, very ripped. Again, we will get back to that. So yeah, that's the very basic version that around the 1890s started kind of becoming the norm, because Japan started putting it in textbooks. Yeah. And as more time passed, then these things just started becoming common knowledge. All the kids, everybody just knew like this is the way the Momotaro story goes.
So just to give some examples of some of the variations I found when I looked online. One is that he wasn't born from the peach, but that the peach actually made the old lady and old man become younger again, and then they just had him naturally.
Yeah.
I think in some versions they just find him floating down the river.
Yeah. So I know there's one, and this might be from the Tohoku or Hokuriku area, where there's a box that floats down the river, right? And then I think they find a baby in the box, but then there's other versions where there's a peach in the box. So
yeah, there are different variations. I believe, especially in modern Japan today, the baby inside the peach is by far the most common one.
Yeah. And there's tons of then interpretations of those. So for example, there's some interpretations where they see Momotaro as like a thrown away child, like a family somewhere couldn't take care of the kid, so they, instead of like having to find a way to have enough money, and they're a poor family, they just throw him into the river, and then the old woman like finds him and raises him. So tons and tons and tons of variations, and part of this is
another thing I saw that I thought was interesting in the variations is his age. Apparently in the older versions, he was usually around 30, but as it's become more and more modern, they've made him younger and younger and younger until he's 15.
Huh. I mean, I guess it goes hand in hand with that whole idea of like the shonen, right? Yeah. The young man going off to like find his fortune, make his way in life, right? And that's a popular kind of trope. That's kind of why you see like 15-year-old kids as the standard in like shonen anime, right?
Yeah. I that's why I wanted to mention, is I think it parallels that. And I believe it was standardized for elementary school textbooks. So
yeah.
Older than elementary school, but like much closer to their age than like a 30-year-old.
Definitely, yeah. And it was right around the Meiji period when that idea of the shonen really started to catch on too. So it goes together right when Momotaro was starting to become the whole national standardized story that shows up in textbooks. The idea of the shonen was also spreading. So it seems like there's a connection there too. But of course, part of the reason of these like wide variation is that the story wasn't always only in written form. It was also in oral form, right? But
as trying most to fairy tales.
Right. It began as just like an oral tale that people told, and then it seems like different variations came from different regions, and then at some point, like I said, during the 1890s, they kind of made this effort to say, like, no, this is the way it is. Everybody just kind of has to tell this version of the story.
Meiji was really into standardization.
Oh yeah. There's tons of this starting like a generalized school curriculum, like that was a big thing too.
Yeah.
So trying to determine like how old the story is perhaps impossible.
At least 20 years.
At least 20 years. I can go maybe 25 at least. At least I can guarantee that.
I'm a little bit more conservative, so I want to say just 20, but I can understand 25.
I can say we will not get that wrong. So now, if you look up how old the story is, what do you get, Ryan? What is the most typical like estimation?
Nearly 1,000, I guess.
Yeah. They say like Muromachi period.
Yeah,
is the most common, and that's around like they say mid to late Muromachi is what you get. So if you look on the English language Wikipedia, like that's what you're gonna get, and that's like
Muromachi right here was 1392 to 1573.
Yeah, so probably what they mean is around the 1400s to 1500s.
Yeah, okay, so 600, 700 years?
Yeah. Yeah, that is math. That works, yes.
Fairly old.
Yeah.
Considerably more than 20 years, but I'm still skeptical.
Well, actually, you have good reason to be skeptical because there is no concrete evidence that confirms that. So there's this well-known folklorist in Japan. He did work in the 1930s. His name is Kunio Yanagita. And it seems like he's the first one that really pushed this idea that it was from the Muromachi period. And the evidence that he proposes for this is that a lot of the other famous folk tales, for example, Sarukani Gassen, the story about the crab and the monkey, and they get in a whole fight about the persimmons. I'm not going to get into that. We can talk about that at some other day. And also, what was the other one? Oh, Kachi Kachi Yama. That's another fascinating like story about like a rabbit and an old man and a tanuki, and it's a pretty crazy, cruel story. But again, we can talk about that another day.
There's lots of humans interacting with animals, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. I don't know. We should dig into that some other time.
Muromachi is just full of sentient animals everywhere.
Yeah. I guess observations about nature, right? It kind of makes sense to like reason the world, try to figure out the world through that, maybe. But anyway, so this guy Yanagita, he looked at other stories. It seemed like these stories all kind of originated around that time. So that was one piece of evidence that he proposed for why Momotaro came from that time. But again, there's no like solid evidence that it really is from that old. Other scholars proposed that perhaps it's only about 400 years old. It started popping up in the Edo period. And then there's this one shrine in Fukui Prefecture. I think it's called Kehi Shrine. And there is it's very old, but it was burned down and then rebuilt in like 1614. And there was a 3-panel carving there that showed like a man coming out of a peach blossoming, right? So it seems like maybe that has a connection, or at the very least, that's proof that motifs of this idea somewhat related to what would become called Momotaro were around in the zeitgeist of the time, I guess. But when is it that like the first published copy came out? I think that was like 1723. That's the first one.
Exactly 1723.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, that's the only known one that existed. It got burned down in a fire in like the Great Kanto Fire in like 1925, I think, the last copy.
The side note to today's lesson is everything in Japan is extremely flammable.
Yes. It's like there's always a story about like, oh, this shrine is like, 3,000 years old.
Yeah.
It got burned down in a fire. This temple is old, but it got burned down in a fire. Yeah.
That's not a joke. It really is the truth. And like sometimes it's not even that long ago. It's like, oh, the last fire was like 1982.
Yep. And I guess that comes in part because there's a lot of wooden constructions, especially the old constructions. And
if you live here, you quickly learn nature hates Japan.
Yeah. And then there's also all those like, wars that they like Oda Nobunaga, like he did his fair share of burning down important sites. Anyway, so 723 is the first kind of, I think, widely produced copy that people are aware of, but again, doesn't exist anymore. And then over the next 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, it's just, more and more and more and more and more versions have been produced and produced and produced and produced.
Yeah.
And
tons.
of course, each interpretation kind of does its own unique things with the story. One interesting thing, for example, that has varied over the years, and I should really make this very clear. A lot of the information that we're talking about today comes from a dissertation that I found by David A. Henry. It's a wonderful resource. It's like almost 300 pages of like really deep analysis of and like historical analysis of this stuff. So I will include a link to that in the show notes. But did you see the part, Ryan, about the there are certain older interpretations as well where it shows Momotaro going into the mountains rather than an island, right? So, yeah. So, and then what David Henry explains is that kind of had the potential for a kind of controversial interpretation of like anti-establishmentarianism, so to speak, right? So, attacking the Oni is attacking, you have to take down this big gate and attack this castle. That could be seen as a kind of thing of like attacking the shogun, attacking the samurai, attacking your daimyo, whatever. And so the more convenient interpretation is to attack these foreign entities that are like, strange, evil things outside of Japan.
So it was nationalism almost from the start.
Yeah. It starts to go in that direction, right? Like the Oni start to be seen as these like mysterious foreign invaders, maybe, or just
Who don't invade.
They don't invade. Yeah. Although in some interpretations they say like, oh, they took our treasure from us. But then there's other interpretations where you just don't really know, like, wait, like, so he just found out about the Oni and he's just going to go like kill him. Like,
yeah. So that, I guess we're kind of beating around the bush. The reason we're bringing it up is because there are different versions of how the Oni are portrayed.
Yeah.
And usually, in most versions, they don't actually do anything. They're just kind of hanging out on their island. And Momotaro just goes there, beats them up, and steals their gold.
Yeah. So, like one that okay, so there's a version of Momotaro on YouTube. It's an animated version. I watched that the other day to see just how they handled this. And as far as I could tell, the Oni weren't attacking like that village or anything where Momotaro lived with the old man and the old woman, but this bird, a tombi, which is they call it a black kite or a kite, I think in English. It's this bird of prey. It's just flying up in the sky, and then it talks to Momotaro and it tells him, "There's this island with Oni, and you should go like Taiji. You should go like eliminate them. You should go like get them."
He's just like, okay.
Yeah, and then Momotaro's just, okay, so he goes to the Oji-chan, the old man is like, okay, I'm going to go do this. And the Oji-chan's
I'm going to
like,
go murder some dudes.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a lot of versions of the story where you don't really get the impression that the Oni have done anything directly to the village or maybe even Japan as a whole. But somehow Momotaro gets information that these Oni are there. And then he goes off on the journey and recruits his, animal companions.
Yeah, so there are many versions, but at least the vast majority of versions I've heard, there's not really any motivation for going to kill the Oni. It's just like, hey, I think I'll go kill the Oni. Yeah.
And another interesting thing that I noticed is in some versions, it seems like the island is very far away. So in one version that I was reading, it seemed like it was several days because it mentioned how Momotaro was bored on the ship. And, they were just passing the time, the three animals and Momotaro, until they arrived at the ship. But then in other versions, it seems like it's just like a ferry ride over to the island. So... yeah, I don't know. It seems like the farther away it is, then you can get into like, oh, it must be like Taiwan, or it must be like, some maybe Okinawa or something. And there are interpretations that frame it that way.
Yeah.
But there's also interpretations that frame it within the country. So, for example, there's the one that's in Shikoku. And there's one that's in this area of Kagawa Prefecture, very near Takamatsu City. It's an area called Kinashi, and that's really interesting in that the kanji is oni, which is like again demon, ogre, and nashi, which means like no. So literally, it means like no demons. Like that's the name of the area, right?
Huh.
And yeah, it's really interesting. So this guy wrote a book in like 1930, and was inspired by the speech of this like Meiji statesman that was inspired by that name. It's this whole thing. I'm not going to get too much into it, but he writes this book connecting, the story of Momotaro to this area in Takamatsu, and then there are these islands off the coast of Takamatsu called. They end up getting linked to. There's this chain of islands, and they end up getting linked to the story. They get called like Onigashima, and there are man-made caves that were potentially used by pirates there, and they become this whole like tourist attraction. So, that's one local place trying to like do something with the story and turn themselves into like a tourist spot. Although Kinashi isn't really a big tourist spot, it seems these days. I don't think it ever was because it's just kind of so out of the way. And then there's Okayama, and
Yeah.
I wrote a lot about Okayama, right, Ryan?
Yes, you did. I think the majority of your notes are about Okayama.
So David Henry, again, he wrote a wonderful dissertation, and in it he focuses on Okayama, for a section of the dissertation. And there's so much we can get into about Okayama, but we're gonna keep it very short. Have you ever been to Okayama, Ryan?
I think I went there once for like a day, but
Okay.
I don't know the area very well at all.
Yeah, I was there for one trip, just a couple days. I think I went to the castle. Yeah, I did go to the castle, and on the way to the castle, I remember stepping in a puddle and getting my shoes wet. So,
Oh, that's
yeah.
a great trip.
but it was a nice trip. It was a nice trip. So, yeah, Okayama is perhaps the most well-known place in Japan to claim some sort of link to the story of Momotaro.
Mm.
They are the masters of like PR. Like they really marketed themselves as like the land of Okayama. And again, that has its roots in the 1930s. A guy wrote a book, connected it to this old story, and then later in the 1950s and 60s, this very famous mayor who eventually got called like the Momotaro Chiji. So he was a governor. Sorry, Momotaro Governor was his nickname. That's how like closely associated he got with this whole thing. He said, let's turn Okayama from like an agricultural like state to like an industrial state. And part of that was promoting tourism through like adopting the Momotaro story. And there were like promotional campaigns, and that went on for decades. And now there's like a Momotaro festival and a Momotaro statue right at the station. And there's Momotaro statues around the main street, and just Momotaro everywhere. There's businesses with Momotaro, and Kibidango was a thing too. So just really, really strong connection there, even though obviously like there wasn't a real Momotaro, but there's people that claim there's tons of inspirations for Momotaro.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's like, it's weird that they were so successful in promoting this being like the home location of something that didn't happen.
Yeah.
People are just like, okay.
So again, I won't get into the whole like backstory, but the story that they're basing it on like has roots back to the Nihongi and the Kojiki, right? Like the oldest texts in Japan. So, they try to link it all the way back to this story. But one thing that Henry points out is it's really weird how like there's these old stories, and then for like, I don't know, like 1,000 years or more, nobody had this link to Momotaro. And then in the 1930s, they go like, wait a second, Momotaro is linked to this old story. It's like, wait, so at some point people forgot that it was linked to this old story, and then in the 1930s they went like, no, now it's linked. And then so it doesn't really hold water, even though the two stories do kind of mesh well together.
Yeah, and those older books like Kojiki are much older than the actual Momotaro story, so
yeah. So it's kind of hard to believe, but it is cool. It is fun. It is fun to go to Okayama and look at the statue and do all this stuff. So it's just interesting, and they did a very good job at promoting tourism with it. And the last place that I want to mention, I think, and we'll go on our little break after that, but is Inuyama in Aichi Prefecture. And again, this has links back to the 1930s. This was a time in Japan when they were like really the railroads were like in construction, and tourism was in a boom, and so that's why you kind of see this convergence in the 1930s. Like places all around Japan were trying to promote themselves because the railroad was there and people could travel more easily. So in Inuyama, there's tons of little coincidences, right? And this one guy, what was his name? Kawaji
Soichi.
Kawaji Soichi. So he's kind of one of the main guys involved with turning this area into like this like pilgrimage that you go on to go see like Momotaro things. So he moved a little shrine that was in this mountain called Momoyama, literally Peach Mountain, right? He moved this little shrine a few kilometers away, closer to like an area that would be more easily accessible to the tourists. So good move on him.
Yeah.
And then he built this bigger shrine and called it Momotaro Jinja, so Momotaro Shrine. And there's statues and like there's the footprints of the old lady when she went to like go wash her clothes in the river. There's all these little details, right? And it turned into kind of like a kitschy tourist spot / shrine. But I was telling you about this, Ryan, earlier, but like my favorite part of this is the pictures, right? So the researcher, David Henry, he talked to the son of this guy, Kawaji Soichi, who Kawaji appointed himself the headmaster of the shrine, and then his son took over, and his son's name is Kawaji Momomitsu, right? So peach light, using the kanji for light for Mitsu. So I guess he
was really dedicated to Momotaro.
Yeah, this guy was like all about Momotaro, man. He named his son like basically after Momotaro. So anyway, the researcher finds these pictures that seem to show what looks like mummified remains of oni, of these demons. Like I think they're like black and white pictures, and they're kind of hard to make out. But the story is that they're mummified remains of the oni. I guess the oni that Momotaro like defeated. But then you go like
he brought them back and then mummified them.
He momofied them.
He momofied them. He wrapped them up in peaches and then preserved them.
Yeah,
until 1995.
And then obviously Momotaro had a camera, right? So
yeah. He invented Kodak.
Well, okay. I guess just like the Egyptian shrines lasted until there were actual cameras, the photos were taken after the fact. So we can give them the benefit of the doubt there. Anyway, so David Henry asks this guy Momomitsu, the priest of the shrine, like, so where are the bodies? And Momomitsu tells him, oh, they burned down in a mysterious fire in 1995.
Which is funny because it sounds like it's just an excuse, but that actually does happen in Japan. So
yeah. And I don't know when this interview happened, but the dissertation was published in 2009. So I figure maybe a year or two or three before it was published, so maybe around 2006.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So apparently if you go to this place, Momotaro Jinja in Inuyama in Aichi Prefecture, you can see pictures of strange mummified oni, right? So
do you think they kept the oni ashes, or do you think they got rid of that?
No, I mean, being Japan, I would think they would have kept the ashes somewhere. They must have an ohaka, like a little grave for the oni, right?
Do onis get graves? I mean, they're not treated very well in the story.
Well, there is an interpretation that, and this gets kind of dark, but there's an interpretation that oni were based on Koreans that had come to Japan. And
that's not that surprising.
Yeah. Because apparently, like, they used like steel clubs or something, and one of the things that oni are known for are their kanebo, which are like metal clubs.
Yeah.
And there's a few other connections, and there's like remains of old Korean like a fortress or something, and I think that's over in Okayama. So yeah, that's a whole other thing. But oni, there's tons of theories of like what these like supernatural creatures are based on, and one of them just happens to be Korean, so not surprising. But yeah, so yeah, tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of different versions. But I think we'll take a break here, and we'll come back with a few other things, including the tiger and the buff oni that we were alluding to earlier. So we'll be right back.
Excited for that.
Hey, Tony here. So normally I'd just say, hey, go check out my other podcast. It's called Japan Station, and the latest episode is blah, blah, blah. And you should totally go do that. Again, it's called Japan Station. Look it up. You can go to japanstationpodcast.com. But that's not the main point of today's little ad break. I just started a Patreon page. I'm totally new to this, but for anybody out there that's not familiar with what Patreon is, it's this website where you can pledge a certain amount of money every month to support somebody that you like that's creating something you enjoy. In this case, if you enjoy Ichimon Japan, or perhaps you enjoy my other podcast, Japan Station, you can go to patreon.com, or rather you can go to japankyo.com/Patreon. I made it nice and easy. Again, japankyo.com/Patreon. And you can pledge a minimum of $2 a month. And that will help me pay for the stuff that I have to spend to make this show. And maybe if it goes really well, I can even, ramp up production and pay somebody else to handle some of the more time-consuming stuff like editing and whatnot, and get you more content. And in exchange, you can go check out some exclusive extra posts and pictures and things that I'm going to be posting over there on the Patreon page. In the future, I may even add another tier that's more than $2 a month. And if you do that, you might get a few extra benefits. But I'm still working on that. Like I said, Patreon is still totally new to me. So right now, I have the minimum set to a very reasonable, I think, $2 a month. So go check it out. Consider it. If you can afford it, I would thank you very much. And if you can't, then, well, thank you for listening anyway. I totally appreciate it and totally understand. I appreciate everyone who's checking out the show. Thank you so much. Make sure to subscribe, of course. That is another thing you can do to support the show. So again, japankyo.com/Patreon. All right, let's get back to the story of Peach Bob. God, Peach Bob. All right, let's go. All right, so we're back, and we're back with more wonderful Momotaro content. So hopefully you're still here.
I am indeed.
It's a lot of
them. Hopefully they're here too.
A lot of Peach Bob, right? Today's all about the Peach Bob.
Good old Peach Bob or Momo Bob.
So one quick thing that I wanted to bring up is, as we were saying, there's tons and tons and tons of interpretations of Momotaro that date back to the Edo period even. There's, of course, modern reimaginings, and we're going to get to one briefly. But
the best one.
Yeah, the best one, the absolute
the new definitive one.
Yes, that is the one that people should get to watch in school. So, but anyway, there's one.
I might actually show it to my students, to be honest.
You should. I think they'll get a laugh out of it. They'll love it. I hope so. If you have a sense of humor, I think you'll get a laugh out of it. So, anyway, one funny one, or maybe not funny but interesting, that I came across. It dates back to the Edo period. I believe it's called Momotaro no Genpuku Sugata. And it's like, literally that means like something like the coming of, Momotaro after he's come of age. Something like that is the literal translation. And it continues the story. So after Momotaro comes back with the treasure, and now he's like a wealthy lord or something, and the Aka Oni and the Ao Oni, the red Oni and the blue Oni, they want revenge, right? So they send their most beautiful daughter. And I guess she doesn't have a horn or anything. Like typically Oni have horns, but I guess she doesn't.
Usually one or two. Or none, I guess.
Yeah. Usually they have like either like the unicorn type, or sometimes they have two, I think.
Yeah. Two, like, I can't think of how to describe it. Opposite directions out of the top of your head.
Like a bull almost?
Yeah.
So, but I guess she just looked human. I didn't actually get to see this book because it's an old Edo period one, but I found, mentioned citation of this online. And so they send the daughter to get their revenge, somehow, to kill him. But she ends up falling in love with him, and she gets torn between her obligation to her Oni parents and her heart because she loves Momotaro. And what happens, Ryan?
Well, guess what? She kills herself.
Yep. So there you go. Happy ending. Momotaro, he got to keep the treasure. And
even when he's not killing the Oni, he's killing the Oni.
Yep. He's just such a good-looking young man. And I don't know. I guess he was nice, because unless the Oni liked, like, mean, like, not nice guys.
I mean, he did genocide her whole people, so.
Seems like it, yeah. Well, again, we'll get to that. Which I guess we'll get to that now. So, as we mentioned, the theme of today, or the question of today, is was Momotaro a thief? And this was partially inspired by there's this general theory, I guess you could say, this proposition that Momotaro was not a nice guy. He was a thief, right? And this is confirmed the later you go into history, because as you go into the Showa period, which is when World War II happened, Momotaro starts to become more and more of a nationalist symbol, and so there's interpretations where Momotaro takes over Hawaii. Like Hawaii is like interpreted as Onigashima, and Taiwan and Singapore, and all these areas where Japan was trying to like conquer during the lead up to World War II. So he becomes this like nationalist, scary figure for all these places. But in Japan, he's like a symbol of the emperor and all this, like, Japan #1. But and then that ultimately culminates with Momotaro's Sacred Sailors, Japan's first animated feature-length film. You can find out more about that in episode 3 of Japan Station. That is like a whole other thing. We're not going to get into that, but it is just amazing. And it's, Momotaro leading this team of animals as they conquer like the Micronesian islands and whatever, and defeat the British. So fascinating stuff. But episode 3, Japan Station. With the animals. Anyway. So there's this idea, right, that Momotaro was kind of, not such a nice guy, and, was killing, genociding, whatever, the Oni, and taking their treasure without much provocation, or any provocation.
Yeah, any at all. They're literally just hanging out on their island by themselves.
Right. So that in 2018, there was a mock trial in Shizuoka by 4th to 6th graders, a group of 4th to 6th graders, and they played the part of like judges and prosecution and Momotaro, and the prosecution was defending the Oni, and the defendant, the guy that was being accused, was Momotaro. He was being accused of using, like, basically assaulting the Oni without provocation, right? And Momotaro's defense was that it was self-defense.
Invading their island and taking their treasure was self-defense.
Yeah. So the argument came down to like Momotaro goes to the island, and the Momotaro like defense is like, we were just there to talk.
Yeah.
And then the Oni side, the prosecution, said he just attacked us out of the blue. And what was the verdict, Ryan?
They basically found him not guilty.
Yeah, basically.
Of course they did.
Yeah, the article doesn't specifically say not guilty, but the judges, they quote the judges as saying like the burden of proof is on the prosecution because innocent until proven guilty, right?
Yes, which is a surprisingly complex like verdict for elementary school kids.
Yeah, it really is. Especially given that the Japanese justice system like is like what, like a 99% conviction rate or something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah,
but, I mean, this guy's nationalism, so we have to defend.
True. Yeah. So yeah, ultimately it was like they don't have enough evidence to prove that Momotaro like instigated the thing. So therefore they can't say that it wasn't self-defense, and he got off. The prosecution wanted 7 years jail sentence.
Which is pretty minor for like murdering and theft.
Yeah, for like killing at least a handful of Oni, and then taking what it was probably like at least millions of dollars worth of like gold and treasures and all that. So Momotaro,
and he gets to keep all the treasure, I think, in the verdict too.
Yeah, well, they didn't say he didn't, so I assume that he did, right? So yeah.
I mean, it does like show the problems with like minorities in court systems too.
Yeah, that is absolutely a problem. That is still, that's an ongoing problem. So what did you think of the verdict, Ryan? What did you think of this whole exercise?
I think my opinion was similar to what you told me earlier. That I think it was a very interesting exercise, especially for elementary school students to kind of dissect a story and think about it. Mm-hmm. I was very disappointed that they kind of just make stuff up. Mm-hmm. So, like we said, there's many versions of the story. As far as I'm aware, there is no version where Momotaro goes to the island just to talk with them and make friends.
I haven't seen that, yeah.
Yeah, their Momotaro defendant just made that up and was like lying on the stand.
Yeah.
And they just get away with it.
It seems like it, yeah.
And I'm also suspicious of how there was not sufficient evidence. You would have dead and injured Oni.
Yeah.
and Momotaro being perfectly fine and healthy and having all their gold.
Yep. And like the article mentions that the kanebo, the steel clubs of the oni, the kibidango, I think the sword, Momotaro's sword, were all presented as evidence. But that's kind of pointless, right? Like it doesn't really like prove anything.
Yeah, the kibidango especially. Like, yeah, this is where I got my friends.
Yeah, he bribed his friends to go beat up the oni. Like what? So yeah, I again, you kind of alluded to what I thought, but yeah, I thought it was a wonderful exercise that in theory encouraged critical thinking. And I think to an extent it did, but ultimately the outcome was kind of flawed in that the students didn't seem like they were perhaps allowed to or given the enough assets to really make a good argument on one side or the other, right?
Yeah. I kind of got the feeling that since these are children, the jury just liked the story because they were told it as even younger children, like kindergarten.
Yeah.
And therefore it's like, oh, he's been like a childhood hero. Of course he's innocent.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the jury was like a panel of 9 kids. I think
everything.
Or, well, not jury. It's like, because in Japan up until recently it was purely judges. So they probably just went with like judges. And it's only been a recent thing where they started using like normal people for jury.
The panel of judging deciders, we'll say, whatever you want.
Yeah. I think that was all like elementary school
deciders.
students. So
yeah.
But interesting nonetheless. So as to our question, was Momotaro a thief? A thief? That one says no, kind of in an ambiguous way, but it doesn't.
It at least says we can't prove he was.
Yeah, we can't prove he was. Yeah, but that's still,
despite like having all the gold.
Yeah, like it doesn't address that question ultimately, right? It just goes to like whether he beat them up justifiably.
I wish I could have been there, but like, even if it was self-defense, why did you take their gold?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I didn't.
You can defend yourself without robbing them.
Yeah. And you showed up at their castle. Like, why did you show up at their castle?
Yeah, how do you go to their home unannounced and then claim self-defense and rob them?
Yeah, body cam. We need a body cam. Okay. But the second one, instance of something along these lines that I absolutely loved.
This one I was much more pleased with.
Yeah. So this was reported on this summer, just in August of 2019. And it seems like this project took quite a few months. But so this 6th grader, a girl, I think she was must have been like 11 or 12 years old.
Somewhere in there, I think.
Yeah. So she entered like this contest that's promoted by, I think, like this library association. But anyway, she did research on Momotaro, and she was inspired by this book that she had that proposed the question of whether like Momotaro, is it okay to kill an oni just because they're oni? Like it was this question that she read in the book. And that got her thinking like, oh wow, like was Momotaro like actually like a bad guy and the oni were like not so bad? So she started with like 20 books. She got like different versions of Momotaro, and then she decided that's not enough. So then she went to another book, like another library, much bigger library. And when all was said and done, she had like over 200 copies of Momotaro, 2 different versions of books of Momotaro. And
yeah, incredible research.
Yeah. This is like, dissertation level research. And she I guess she read through all of them, sorted them by
elementary school.
Yeah.
Too.
Sorted them by era. So like Edo period, Meiji period, Showa period, and looked at the general trend of like how that interaction happened between Momotaro and the Oni, right? Like, was Momotaro nice? Were the Oni nice? How did Momotaro end up with the riches? And what the article, puts forth, unfortunately I don't have access to this book, although it was published in September for like, I think it cost like 1,650 yen. So like $15. You can get it on Amazon Japan. And the title is actually, I believe it's something like, Was Momotaro a Thief? What we can learn about the Oni through the story of Momotaro. That's the translation, roughly.
It even sounds like the name of a dissertation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the trend that the article points out is in the Edo period, what she found was Edo leading up to Meiji Momotaro would take, like, the implication is by force, the treasure from the Oni. Like, ubao means to, like, take, or could even mean, like, steal in certain contexts.
Yeah, take forcefully.
Yeah. From the Oni. Okay? So,
Seize.
right? Seize. Yeah. That's what you see in dictionaries a lot. So, obviously, the implication is there that Momotaro showed up, he beat up the Oni, took their stuff. Now, as you get into, I believe it was like the late Meiji period, leading up into, around the late Meiji period. So that's like early 1900s, teens, 20s, right before the Taisho. But anyway, late Meiji. What she found was that the Oni give Momotaro the treasure of their own volition. Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess he shows up, he threatens them, and then they go like, no, don't beat us up. Here it is. Okay. So then as you get into the Showa period, this was kind of vague in the article, but it says like the Oni become nicer. So the implication there, at least how I found, was like, it seems like the second that Momotaro gets there, they're like, no, here you go. Like, we're not going to, please, you're welcome to come in and take our stuff. Just, we're not going to fight you. Like, they just become very nice and docile. Right?
Yeah, they're just friendly now.
Yeah, they're just friendly, right? Like, there's like, please sit down. We made a meal for you. Enjoy yourselves.
Welcome to Onigashima.
Yeah, welcome to Onigashima. Just please,
take some gold for coming.
Yeah. Here, take our daughters. Take everything. Take the castle. Like, I don't think it was to that extent, but
yeah.
There's a general trend that gets pointed out is that Momotaro seems like he's just as dead set on getting those Oni and taking their stuff, whereas the Oni, like, every step of the way, like, they're losing everything, but just becoming nicer as the years go by.
So I don't know what her versions she read personally are, but some of the ones I've read for the second step would be they fight a bit and then the Oni surrender and give the gold, like, to appease Momotaro. So, like, there still is violence, I think.
Yeah.
But then I think in the third step, then it's just, oh, you're scary, here's gold.
Yeah. That's the vibe that I get. Yeah, most interpretations even today that I, like, if you look online, usually, like, he fights with them for a little bit, and then, like,
I thought you were maybe implying number 2 didn't have fighting, but never mind.
Oni, it's tough to tell because the article doesn't go into super detail. So
yeah, it's a fairly short article.
Yeah. But I think, nevertheless, the ultimate outcome, and this is a direct quote of her name is Kuramochi Yotsuba, I believe. Yotsuba is her first name. And her ultimate quote is, and I'm paraphrasing here slightly, but what I want people to take away from this is that the Oni weren't so bad, like, it wasn't the Oni that were, like, the bad ones in this. And I thought that was, like, a wonderful takeaway. And then another thing that the article points out is that, like, Japan has this tendency of kind of being scared and of, like, unknown things, like the surrounding islands, the foreigners, the people that they don't understand their language and their customs. And so then they go, like, conquer them or whatever, right? And it seems like Yotsuba kind of comes to this conclusion as well, even though that part of it wasn't a direct quote. So I ultimately loved it. I mean, what did you think, Ryan?
Oh, I liked her interpretation too. I mean, it's kind of how I felt about the story, so I was happy to see someone who did very extensive research arriving at the same conclusion. Yeah.
So, and there's obviously, slightly more cleaned up versions, and Momotaro in recent years is just more seen as, like, a general folktale, a symbol of kind of Japan, but not in a nationalistic way. Like these days, David Henry, the guy that was talking about that wrote the dissertation that I read, he points out how Momotaro is seen more as a symbol of peace and sports, and like Okayama really ran with that whole idea of, like, peace and sports, and they use him as, like, a mascot for, like, they used him for a mascot for this sports tournament a while ago. I think it was called the Kokutai, if I remember correctly. But anyway, so, nowadays Momotaro doesn't really have that, but obviously it does have those roots in that whole nationalistic thing and kind of, like, scary Japan taking over neighboring countries. But, that's things change, and then at least for the most part, Japan isn't like that. There are people, but there's always people like that in anywhere you go. But I think we should get to the thing that we've been alluding to the entire episode.
Yes, the true version of Momotaro.
The what we 100% wholeheartedly think is the definitive version of Momotaro. Okay, so I think we've concluded that, okay, we can say Momotaro was a thief. Like, that's okay. Yes, there's multiple versions. It depends on which version you're talking about. But for the most part, yeah, he was kind of thiefy. So let's say yes.
We're still not sure if he was a tiefling. But
yeah, we're not sure about that. That's, yeah. But anyway, definitive version. So a little bit of intro. Back in 2018, I stumbled across this this article that talked about a video. It was in January of 2018. And as some listeners may be aware, I write articles for JapanKyo.com. I try to find like interesting things going on in Japan, especially things that haven't been reported on yet. And when I have time, I write articles about that. And I found this article, and ultimately I didn't write an article about it because I just found it so wonderful that I just couldn't bring myself to like do it justice in the form of an article. So I'm happy to talk about it here. So briefly, this like AI / like VR development company. They make this like they make apps. They got a text of Momotaro, just a classic retelling, just a pretty standard version, and they dumped it into this AI program that could animate it and use like CG, like computer generated like imagery to animate an actual visual interpretation of it. And the results were just absolutely ridiculous. So, Ryan, what are some of the highlights of this?
I mean, literally everything is amazing. So it starts talking about the Oji-san, Oba-san, the old man and old lady.
Yeah.
And so it looks like in like mid-2000s MMO kind of in terms of graphics.
Yeah.
Imagine like early World of Warcraft or something, or EverQuest even. Mm-hmm. And the Oba-san, which again is like old lady, I think most people picture 60 to 70-year-old lady, is like a 20-year-old warrior woman in like leather armor.
Yes.
She goes to the river to do laundry, which apparently means she just starts dancing in the water.
Yep.
I'm like, fortunately on the website, they put up a whole bunch of still images that I'm scrolling through to retell this. Uh-huh. The giant peach she finds is just a giant apple. That just like falls from the sky. Yep. Whenever a new character is introduced, they just fall from the sky.
Yep.
The Oji-san is like in this baby blue suit.
He's a bald guy, right?
Yeah, he's a bald guy with glasses. He kind of looks like Professor X, and he just falls from the sky next to her. The child they find is like the most stereotypical 90s kid ever. He's got a purple t-shirt, neon green shoes, and a sideways baseball hat.
Yep.
And then like they give him a name, and suddenly he's just like this 20-year-old Castlevania-esque looking knight dude with a giant sword.
Yep.
And when the AI is telling the story, anytime it mentions a new character, they just spawn in wherever it happens to be focused.
Yep. Even if it's not saying like the person is there, it's just talking about like
yeah. Just any mention of them summons them.
Yep.
So the Oni is summoned right next to Momotaro and his family, and he looks like basically naked Shrek if he's really, really buff. And he just spawns there and just hangs out with the family. Uh-huh. So we can clearly see the Oni had no bad intent. No. He just wants to hang out and lift weights.
Yeah, he's just hanging out with the family there. Like, I don't get it, right? Like, why they gotta go beat him up?
He's really close to Oji-san, so I think they're like lifting buddies or something.
Yeah.
When he befriends the animals, for some reason the dog is a tiger.
Yep, and it likes to stand on its hind legs, right?
Yes. It's not like an anthropomorphic tiger. It is a 4-leg quadrupedal tiger that just stands on 2 legs and is always looking straight up at the sky. And for whatever reason, it gets left behind when they go on the journey. Yep. It just hangs out with the Oni and the grandfather. The monkey's a cute little monkey. They got him pretty good. He looks like something from like Monkey Ball. Uh-huh. The pheasant is weird. It has no animations. It's like it looks like a miniature airplane that was painted to look like a bird. And it just kind of falls on the ground and rolls around.
Yeah. It's just when in the scene that it's introduced, it's just rolling around on the floor for like 5-10 seconds. I don't know.
And then later it gets on the boat and it's like stuck on the bow. And when they all get off, like it just gets stuck there and stays on the boat. Some other guy spawns. I think when they mention Momotaro again, for whatever reason, it spawns another guy and he just floats in the air above their boat. So, oh yes, they have a gigantic ship to go to Onigashima, which is like not even far away. The boat like fills up the whole ocean in this thing. But Momotaro doesn't even get on the boat. He just walks through the water.
Yeah, he just zooms right through the water, right?
The monkey and the bird stay on the boat.
Yeah.
When he gets to the island, the Oni's not even there because he's still back hanging out with the parents.
Yep.
It's glorious. You have to watch this. Even if you can't understand Japanese at all.
Yep. Yeah.
Just seeing this weird crap happen is amazing.
I mean, if you know the basic story of Momotaro, like you know what's supposed to be happening, right? And it's exactly what we outlined at the beginning. It's like the most standard reinterpretation or the most standard telling of the story. But I think one of the interesting things of this, like, what is it, like AI program and how it interprets Japanese speech is that it has trouble, for example, with the way Japanese is in that it drops the subject. So, for example, if in Japanese, if you know what the subject is, like I or you or him, and it's understood contextually, you don't have to say it every time. So if I'm saying go school, and just contextually you think that it's me talking, you understand that I'm talking about I will go to school. With the AI, it has trouble interpreting that. So, for example, if the last subject mentioned is the old man, and then it says, this happens, like and then they go to Onigashima. And so then the old man is like all of a sudden going to Onigashima, right? Because the last subject mentioned is the old man, and then it just assumes that the old man is the one that goes to Onigashima, even though he doesn't, right? It's Momotaro and the animals. So
two of the animals,
or two. Okay, yeah. I can't keep track of where the hell like they're like floating in the air and like floating on top of the head or whatever. So it's just hilarious. Like, but even if you don't know Japanese, as long as you know the general story, it's just wonderful. It's the best 16 minutes, the best 16-minute long Momotaro interpretation, or maybe the best Momotaro interpretation ever. So
yes,
I think
this is the standard now.
Yeah, this is absolutely our favorite, and I will include the video in the show notes at japankyo.com. Just look for this episode, go to podcasts and look for this episode, Momotaro, okay? So that's pretty much all the major stuff that we wanted to talk about. There's tons and tons and tons of more stuff that we could go into, for example, the whole Okayama thing.
Yeah, way more Okayama.
But that's like a whole other, at least another hour, if not more. So we're going to leave it at that, unless there's anything else you wanted to add, Ryan?
No, I'm good.
Okay. So, go check out Momotaro, the video. If you really, really, really want to know more about it, go check out David Henry's dissertation. I think it's called Momotaro as National Allegory. It's just really interesting stuff. I will include the link to that as well. And if you have any questions that you want us to address, if you want us to go into the whole Okayama thing, send us a question. We could do that. If you have other weird or interesting questions that you just don't know about Japan, that you've looked up online and you can't figure it out, let us know. We'll take a stab at it. We won't promise that we'll figure it out, but we can try. And that is Ichimon at japankyo.com. Again, ICHIMON, just like the show, at japankyo.com. You can also go to social media. I check Twitter fairly often at Japankyo News, so that's another way to get in touch. So that about does it. And unless you have anything else, Ryan, I think we're done.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm just going to go watch that video again.
All right, let's go watch the video. See you guys.
See you.